The Intertech Group and the Zucker family are proud to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment.
Welcome to We the Women. This is our celebration of the 19th Amendment. Exactly 100 years ago, on August 18th, 1920, the 19th Amendment was ratified, giving women the right to vote. To celebrate, we'll be talking to women from around South Carolina, thought leaders, movers and shakers. We'll ask them about how they have used their voice and what they have done to contribute to our great democracy. Enjoy the conversation. Well, I'm so excited to interview you because your generation really mentored mine. So I just want to hear about your career, what it was like to be in this newsroom for decades. I watched the oral history that the South Carolina Press Association has. It's about a 40-minute video interview with you. And you said several times in that interview, you said you had to convince people that you were serious. I don't know if you remember saying that, but you talked about interviewing for different jobs. I think it was here and then in New Jersey, or in Philadelphia and New Jersey. And you used that phrase a couple times. They wanted to make sure that you were serious.
That was really the key thing here, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
This has been 46 years, and all but 4 of those years were in this newsroom and then this newspaper. And I was interested in law, and I was interested, and of course I love journalism. I mean, I did the annual, the school annual. We revived it actually, and the newspaper. And by the time I'd finished that, and I was going to college, I was so tired of all of that. My brother was a lawyer. He was very encouraging. I love the idea of being a lawyer. And so I did pre-law, and there's no such thing as that, not really, you take everything else. But I was back by the second year doing journalism. And so I went to the University of Tennessee, and I graduated with a degree in journalism. But I took my electives in law school, which was great. My senior year in college, I had my electives in law school. So, but that sort of said to me, by the next year when I worked for the university and I did a few other things, I was really ready to get back into journalism. So I wrote a lot of newspapers. I wrote a couple of newspapers. I thought, the Honolulu Star, doesn't that sound wonderful? Wrote them. I saw something about the News and Courier, and it was something that intrigued me, so I thought, well, I'll try that. And so a couple of other things, and Honolulu Star told me that 10 years experience was necessary because everybody wanted to go there. And so I didn't hear from the News and Courier, and I went on to a job in Washington, a political newsletter that I was not really interested in because it was advocacy journalism and I wasn't, but I loved being in Washington and all the politics and all that. But a letter found its way to me from this newspaper. Went through several people before it got to me, and I was interested. I came in, interviewed, and when I went back to Washington, they called and offered me a job in what was called the women's department. And I was able to say, thank you, but no, thank you. I don't want to do that. And they called me back, and they offered me a job in the newsroom. I was told later by one of the editors there that they really said they weren't really interested that I had a journalism degree, but they were interested that I had gone to law school, and they thought I might be serious.
Right.
That was the serious one. So that was the comment. Right. And so I got the job. I came. The obvious thing was to cover the courts, and so that's what I first did. The political reporter walked out 6 months after I came in and was miffed about something. And they said, Columbia's that way. And that was my orientation. So I went off to Columbia. I didn't even know at that point I carried this big royal typewriter all the way up the steps to the State House, because that's what I thought you could do until I found out there were side entrances. It was quite interesting. Loved it. Of course, I loved it. I had been covering the courts, so I knew a lot of the legislators because they were mostly all lawyers. So it was it was great. And so that was did that for 2.5 years. Loved every minute of it. And then fell in love. And my husband had just graduated from the college at Charleston, and he was really talented, and he was being encouraged by local artists to go to the Slade School in London. Well, that wasn't going to happen, but he applied for yet another degree at Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. So, you know, we got married, off to Philadelphia, no money, no jobs.
What year was this?
1963.
Okay.
We were married in 1963. And when I got to Philadelphia, you know, and I got the sense that it was not going to be easy to break into the newsroom in Philadelphia. It was made pretty clear to me that the Inquirer was not going to take my application for the newsroom. So I went across the river to New Jersey, and the Camden Courier Post was a family-owned newspaper that had just been bought by Gannett. But one of the executives there was a member of this family, and she was a woman. And there were women in that newsroom.
Yeah.
So it was a really interesting thing to see that they had a number of women in the newsroom, and it was much tougher in Philly, as a matter of fact. Yeah. So I was assigned to, you know, cover politics, and that was 4 years. We were there from 63 to 67. And then Manning, you know, finished the 4 years, and we were both anxious to come back to Charleston. I was not the native, he was, but I loved Charleston. You know, it made me feel good to be here. So I was really anxious to come back. And the News and Courier was willing to give me my job back, which is even more wonderful. So I was back covering the legislature. At that one point, when I went to cover the legislature the first time, I was the first woman to be assigned full-time coverage of the legislature. And I was here the only woman in the newsroom, until that later changed, and it changed fairly quickly. But I was first the only woman in this newsroom at the time in 61, and then the first one to cover the legislature, assigned permanently to cover the legislature. And I loved that. I mean, I did that for 15 years. I was a reporter for 15 years, and it was just the best time, best fun. I loved every bit of it. It was exciting. In those days, you could still get scoops, you know, and I loved them too. I wanted one or two. I mean, I liked scoops. I liked to be able to be the first to have the things, you know, the stories. I also wanted to be correct and right too. I didn't want to just get it first. I wanted to get it right. And I like to think that I mostly did that. And so it was, I couldn't imagine a better job. And I was then offered the position of assistant managing editor of the News and Courier. And I really had to think about that, because I knew I loved what I did. And I had seen reporters go on to the desk or other jobs because it paid more, in truth. You know, primarily because it paid more. And they weren't particularly happy about it. And I knew I was happy, and I wasn't sure I wanted to do that. But then we talked a lot about it, and I decided that maybe the time had come to move on, to have a different kind of satisfaction. Not did you get the scoop and was it the best, you know, but did you have a good newspaper? Right. And that was the difference in the satisfaction I felt. I was the assistant managing editor of the News and Courier for 5 years, and enjoyed it. I mean, there were real challenges. The Spoleto Festival was just getting ready to start. I had no idea what that was going to be about. Was anybody even going to come, you know? So I was assigned to develop the coverage for Spoleto. And the publisher at the time decided to go all out. We were just going to take a chance on it. We allotted a lot of pages to it. I called the New York Times and asked for somebody who was really competent in all the arts. Did they know some freelancer? And they gave me a guy named Bob Jones, who became our overview reporter. He'd come here every year, and he was fabulous. He knew music, but he knew all the arts, and he was a great writer. And people yearned to see his work. And I think that, I mean, we had great response to how we covered that festival, and we still cover it much the same way. I was very proud of how we'd started it, and pretty much continued to give it the attention that we thought it deserved. So that was a real plus for me during that time. I really enjoyed that. And then I was offered the position of editor of the Evening Post, the afternoon paper. Now, we were in the same building, and we were in the same, the same sides, but the Post was the afternoon paper, the News and Courier, the morning paper, and we were very competitive. Yeah. We really loved that, and then people wouldn't believe it, but it was really true. So I wasn't used to I'd been the competition, but I got the job with the Evening Post. I mean, they offered me the editorship, and there had not been a woman editor, and so I was very interested in it too. I mean, it would seem like, again, another time to make another change, and I was happy to have done that. There were a lot of things we did. I noticed that the morning paper had got lots of letters to the editor, and the afternoon paper got very few letters to the editor. And I thought, well, it's because in the morning people read it and they get furious and they write letters to the editor. And in the evening, they come back and they eat dinner and they go, I think I'll write, I think I'll go to bed, right? So I developed the Golden Pen Award.
Oh, you did?
I did. Uh-huh. And I decided that, how we would really try to encourage readers. And it did work. We gave a golden pen every month, and the staff talked about it. And we tried to find the letters we thought were the most thoughtful. It didn't matter what position they were taking. Was the most thoughtful. When people had to sign their names and they had to tell kind of where they lived. I mean, they had to be responsible too. Yeah. And at the end of the year, we would have a major luncheon. And we would go around the table. We'd given their golden pens. We'd give them a printout of all of the winning letters, which they loved to take home. But we would go around the table and talk about the response to their letters, and it was wonderful. They could tell you the best stories about what had happened, and it was one of my favorite things that we did there. It was really, we were encouraging people to write, and is it different now? That was a real outlet then for people, but they still want to see that in print. I think it's still, they feel it very important. Yeah. I mean, it's one thing with the social media to say what they say, and and I guess I've been so disappointed to see how ugly it can be, and then that's just too bad. The lack of civility has really bothered me as what I've seen as the result. But and then the paper was getting ready to merge, and the editor of the News and Courier was retiring so I became the editor of the News and Courier too as we were doing the merger. So I was editor of both papers for a very short period of time, and then I became the first editor of the Post-Courier.
Yeah. So your biography, people always talk about how you were the first woman to cover the legislature, you're the first female editor of the Evening Post, first editor ever, and female editor of the Post and Courier. How much do you think that's part of what's important to you, is being the first woman? Is that?
It's always noted, but what was most important to me was what I did. Yeah. I loved what I did. I loved every single time. I had to think about each time to make that step, because I knew I loved what I was doing. I was very fortunate that I loved what I was doing. But I also knew that, I didn't want to, I'm not saying I didn't want to be a reporter, because I was always like a reporter in many ways. I believed that editorials have to be informed opinion. You have to, and so I called everybody on all sides as I was trying to come up with things. I functioned in many ways still as a reporter, as I tried to get the facts and as we tried to come to decisions. We did endorsements, and this was different. We didn't endorse anybody who we had not interviewed. We opened the door to everybody. It took a long time. It took weeks. The more candidates, and we really did interview all of those people, and we came to conclusions based on those interviews. You changed your mind immediately once you sat down and really started to talk to people. And I used to say, I'm trying to think of how to say this to you, but I thought that it was a lose-lose situation with endorsements in many ways, because no matter if you endorse somebody and they won, they said, oh, well, of course I would have won anyway, right? And if you didn't endorse somebody, then they lose, then they were very unhappy with you. So you really couldn't win, except it was my position that if you're going to make comments on legislation and freedom of information and restructuring state government, and you're going to express views on that, and you don't express views on who's going to be doing all that, who's going to be making the laws, who's going to be doing it, then you really haven't done your job. So I didn't think that it was, I felt it was necessary. But no, it's not necessarily a lot of fun to do,
Any of those races stick out in your mind as being particularly interesting, or good conversations with the candidates, or? We're glad
I'm
you
trying to
were
think
with
of if there's any in particular, but not any in particular. They were all mostly interesting. I mean, you know, and people would come, and not everybody did, but almost everybody did, because,
Sure.
you know, all the way through this process, from the beginning, when you were a reporter, when you were assistant managing editor, and when you were the editor, there was one thing I thought was the fairest thing, and that was to be fair. I used to have people say, Barbara, do me a good story, and I would say, I will be fair. And they couldn't say they didn't want you to be fair. Of course they wanted you to be fair, but they appreciated that. They really did. I thought it was terribly important to make them have a sense of fairness, of ability to talk to you, and for you to listen before you came to conclusions. So it was a...
So you got to cover the legislature in the 70s into the 80s.
From 61, actually, when I started covering the legislature, there were no Republicans. They were all
That's what
Democrats.
I wanted to ask you about. There was a moment while you were covering it that this state did its transition.
Absolutely was. I mean, the joke used to be that the Republicans would have their conventions in the phone booth. You know, that was the story. But they were all Democrats. From when I left in 63, when covering they were all Democrats. When I came back in 67, it had already started to change a bit. And it changed a bit in a lot of ways. There were a few more women. State government had been very closed doors. I mean, I would go to, in those early days, the committees were run by, the state was run by the legislature, and not, the governor had very little power. The exception to that was Fritz Hollings when he was governor. Fritz was the governor when I came to Charleston. And he was a force of nature. I mean, he really was. He was terrific. He'd been lieutenant governor. He'd been there. I all knew Fritz. Besides that, he just was great. He was, he was farsighted. He was great personality, and so he was, as I say, he stands always out in my mind as being one of the best governors or best politicians, but. When I came back in 67, the Republicans started, and it happened much faster than most people suspected, because South Carolinians were Democrats, but they liked to consider themselves South Carolina Democrats, and when the national elections came around, they had a hard time making that decision to be with the national Democratic candidate compared. They were all, and I always thought they really needed to have party registration. I think they would have all been a lot happier than trying to figure it all out, and they still won't do that, but nevertheless, because I do think that it's up to the parties to pick their best candidates and then let us all make the decision on who's the best one to win. But it had started to change, and it changed very rapidly.
And it changed a lot earlier than the rest of the country.
I think it did. Yes, it did, because they started realigning, and it was quite interesting to see.
Was it that governor's race, or what was the tipping point? What do you think was?
Well, Jim Edwards was the first Republican governor, and because there had been a really unfortunate set of circumstances with Pug Ravenel was going to be the nominee, and he got deposed, and he had a great campaign going. And then somebody else came along, and there was such dissatisfaction with all that Edwards, who was really gregarious guy. Everybody loved Jim Edwards, and there couldn't have been a better one to make that transition. Frankly, Edwards was the best one, and from that time on, it came, not all the time, because there were other governors after that.
What else do people need to know about that time, or what sticks out in your mind about that time? Was it a philosophical shift that was happening, or?
I think it had always been there. They just hadn't made it. I think they was still. I think it was there, always. Because I say when you would call them when they had the presidential nominee was Democrat, and they would kind of back off or not be sure, So it was pretty clear that what was happening. There were true Democrats and there were true Republicans, and finally they were saying so. It was interesting.
Right. So I talk to people about you, and they say, Barbara knew everyone and she was comfortable in all circles. And you were working at a time when, Mendel Rivers, Strom Thurmond, Fritz Hollings, do you have any stories?
I'll give you a Mendel story, quick Mendel story. you know, he was great with all of his constituents. That was one of his things. And he was also, he had a number of problems, but I'd been to something, I've forgotten, it was a christening of some ship that Mendel was on. I remember being in the plane, because we were all there to cover it. Yeah. And I thought he looked very pensive. He was very quiet, which was very unlike him. Mm-hmm. And within a week or so, we got the word here that Mendel was in the hospital in Birmingham and having major heart problems, major. Yeah. And of course, Mendel Rivers everybody thought Mendel brought all this stuff to the Navy base. I mean, they couldn't live without Mendel Rivers. What would Charleston ever do if they lost Mendel Rivers? Yeah. And I was trying to get the story, and the word was coming in that Mendel was in the hospital, and it was serious business and all that. And the phone rang, and he said, "Miss Barbara," and I said, "Mendel?" And he said, "Yes, I'm here in Birmingham, and I'm having this hospital, and they're going to do the surgery tomorrow, and just wanted you to know," he wanted his local newspaper to have that story. He wanted me or whoever, but I knew him because I was going to Washington. We once had a Washington bureau, and then we didn't, so I went once a month. Yeah. So I was always making contact, so I was the one he called. Yeah. And it was very cagey of Mendel, because the word was that Palmer Gilliard, who was the mayor, was very interested in running for Congress. Mm-hmm. And he said very slyly to me, "How's Palmer?" Mm-hmm. And I said, "Mendel," because I knew what he was doing, you know. And he said, I'm not coming out of here feet first." Mm-hmm. Well, he did. Yeah. Unfortunately, he did. And, you know, it was shock here. I mean, people worried about what was going to happen at the Navy base and didn't have Mendel and all that. And people lined the road all the way to Monk's Corner, where he was buried, in Gumville maybe, or wherever he was. Yeah. And just, you know, they thought a real loss, because he was a real powerhouse for them in Washington.
Did you cover that?
I did.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah. Is that hard to write, or do you remember?
No, it was right to write. I knew him, and you know, but there was great sadness when he died.
Yeah. So it sounds like, you know, you got a lot of pleasure out of getting a scoop, or being the person that somebody called.
Well, of course.
Do you have advice for reporters on how you did it?
I think they just, you know what? Yeah. I worked hard, and I went to every meeting. Yeah. I went to all the committee meetings, you know, because I didn't know how you were going to cover things if you didn't go find out what was going on behind the scenes and everywhere else. So I was around. I worked hard. I covered the legislature. I just got to know people, and they also knew. I really think they knew I would treat them fairly, and they also knew that I would also call everybody. I called every side. I didn't vote in primaries at all, because when I was a reporter, or even when I was assistant managing editor, because I just didn't want people to know how I felt, what I thought. Right. You know, I wanted them not to feel I was on either side. I thought that was very important. I think that newsroom neutrality on the news pages is a really good thing. Right. And I think that it was appreciated. I think it's all got to be labeled otherwise, and it's terribly important too. But I just felt that they trusted me to treat them fairly and to try to get both sides. And that's what I tried to do. I mean, you can't always do that, because people won't give you that information. But I was around, and I was covering, and I was pretty much where they were a lot.
So I saw this picture of you. You had sounds like a royal typewriter in front of you. You had your cup of coffee. You had your phone, and you had a bottle of glue.
Yes.
Is that possible?
Oh, yes.
What is that?
We used to paste those pages together. Those glue pots were something else. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I don't have a glue pot on my desk. Yeah,
well, you know, I send my stories when I was first reporter by Western Union in Columbia. That's
really? Is that true?
That's really true. That's really true. They'd come knock on my hotel door, and I'd give them that copy, and off it would go.
And then how long would it take to get here?
Well, enough to make the paper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And then we had other things in the Columbia Bureau. You know,
Sure.
we had a teletype kind of thing, and college students would come in and type the stuff. But we went through so many phases of how to.
Yeah.
This is today. It's just amazing to me still.
Yeah, what was the newsroom like then? I mean, it must have been a
Oh,
lot more
such
people.
fun.
Yeah.
Such fun. Doug Donahue was the city editor for much of my time there, and he was just the jolliest guy. He would be singing at the desk, and everybody was around, and everybody, we all went out together afterwards, too, because we actually worked, until 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning at one point, in the newsroom. Well, certainly with the News and Courier. Post would come in early in the morning, and they would go home by 3 o'clock, and I was always somewhere like down at the Byers drugstore, talking to people and listening. I could go to Byers and come back with 3 stories, I mean, that's just the way it was. So
Where was your hangout? Where would you guys go out after work?
Oh, there were a number of restaurants. Yeah, we would all go out and have fun. They're not around anymore. They're all kind of gone, but we did go out and we had great fun. At least in those early days. I mean, later on after I was married, I didn't go out as much. But
so, what do you, as you transitioned into being an editor and listening to you talk, I bet you were a reporter's editor. What in your opinion made a good paper? When did you go home at night and feel like you did it right?
Oh, I think it's balanced. I mean, we're a local paper, so we really wanted to cover what's going on locally for sure. The Evening Post tried it, not when I was there, but they tried to just do all front page local stories, and I didn't think that was not my cup of tea. I felt that it should reflect the world but concentrate on the local matters. So, if there was some huge thing that was Washington's story, it wasn't in the front page of no matter what. And it didn't last. That experiment did not last very long. Yeah. So I think it has to be well balanced. You want a little bit of most, but the people also want to concentrate on the local news too. So I think that a well balanced, innovative kind of things. We did a lot of interesting things. I mean, the Splato thing was particularly a very different thing for us to do. But I don't know. I mean, you want a good editorial page, and you want a little bit of everything.
So after more than 40 years, you retired.
Mm-hmm.
And was it hard to redefine yourself after all these years of being a journalist?
I kept doing my column. Yeah. I had a column called Dimensions, and it was on the op-ed page. And mostly when I was a reporter, it was just an explanatory column. I was very careful. I'd go behind the scenes and tell things they might not know or try to explain things, but it was not it didn't take big positions because I was a reporter, and I didn't want to do that. It was a fine line to walk, but I did do that. And then, of course, when I became the editor, I also kept maintaining the column. It ran on Sunday, and it was on. And so I was asked to keep the column for, I think I kept it for at least 3 years.
Yeah, so you still had a hand in.
And, just to keep the hand in so that, and I did that every week. So I was still calling people. Because, as I tell you, I was still being a reporter, so I was calling all the legislators and saying, oh, now tell me about this. Yeah. So it was a great way to make the transition. Right. And I still do a little editing now for at least one person here. So I talk to people every week, so it's still nice. It's really great,
Well, do you have any advice for especially young women just starting their journalism careers, looking back, things you might have done differently or wish you'd known?
I'm just glad that there's no question about whether or not you're serious or not. Yeah. It's wonderful for me to see all the women in the newsroom and what a change it's been. Mm-hmm. That's just terrific. I mean, I think that gives me great pleasure to see that out there, and I think they're pretty savvy about it. I don't think they need advice from me. I think they're all doing very well these days. I hope so. Yeah. But you do need to love it. You need to be, if you're going to commit to this, because it takes a lot of commitment to do what you need to do and to be here as long as you need to be sometimes, and to so I just hail them. I think it's good that we've got what we've got these days.
Yeah. Well, what do you miss? That'll be my last question.
I still miss writing. Yeah. I kept that on for a while, and I still miss writing. I loved editing, but I also, that was the other thing that I loved, going back to the editorial side, because I was writing all the time compared to being, in the assistant managing editor's position. So I do miss writing, but I've been so busy, in particular lately, with the book that's being done about my husband's work, and so it's, I'm not bored, ever, I don't think.
Well, I really enjoyed getting to sit down and talk to you a little bit.
Well, me too. Nice to talk with you.
Yeah, thank you.